Steve Moran here with another episode of Foresight TV, and I am really excited to be able to talk to a couple of master storytellers, Bruce Felt, who's probably somebody you don't know and you should know, and Jack York, who probably knows more people in the senior living industry than I do. And we are going to talk about storytelling and technology and how all that works together. But before we get started, this. Hey guys, Steve Moran here. And I'm so happy because I actually have a real life mug that looks like our logo. So anyway, thank you very much. Bruce, let's start with you and talk a little bit about who you are and how you came to this crazy world of senior living. And then, Jack, I'm going to ask you the same question for those people who might not know you.
Okay. Well, thanks, Steve. I'm glad to be here with you as well as Jack. My name is Bruce Felt. I'm president owner of Memories by Design, which is basically a boutique video production company. We originated with our working with funeral homes, families, producing tribute videos for the funeral services industry. We do that throughout the country. Over the course of the last 3 or 4 years, I've looked to take our area of expertise in storytelling with life story videos and sharing them with senior communities. I like the fact that we can produce something that is somewhat of a video legacy for those that are still with us, who are still alive, so that we can honor and celebrate with them together. And that's so over the course of time in the last year or two, I've slowly branched into the senior community and meeting people like you, Steve, as well as you, Jack.
Hey, Bruce, have you seen the somebody sent us a couple weeks ago, I think it's in Japan, the barcodes on a tombstone where you can put your smartphone and then they have the life story of the person who's buried.
Yes, that's actually been going on for quite a while.
Yeah, I never had such before.
It's interesting. It's just the challenge of people embracing that code on a tombstone. In this country, not so much, and of course, cremation has changed so much of that too. But maybe on an urn, you can put the barcode and be able to do that. Definitely moving with technology there.
So, would you have a barcode on your tomb, Jack? Not that I expect you to need one for a long time.
No, I would. I mean, it's what you're talking about, Bruce, is so relevant. On a personal level, because I always think about I'll answer your question at the end of my long-winded sentence here, Steve. But my dad did the coolest things in World War II, and my kids never met my dad. Died before they were born, and what would I give to be able to have my kids watch my dad talking for a few minutes about what he did in World War II? So I don't think. For me, it's more, I think about other people. I don't know. There's enough bad videos of me out there, Steve, that I think that people can clues together whatever they want. But I wouldn't be against it. I think it's I think for me, you know my story, Steve. I had a lot of positive things happen in my life, and I'm always happy to share them. But I don't know. It feels kind of vain to talk about it yourself a little bit, but. I love the concept of what you're doing, Bruce.
Thank you. Thank you.
So Jack, let's actually back you up a little bit to my original question. So who are you and what's kind of your story?
Well, right now I am Jack York in the middle, right next to the Omaha airport, getting ready to pick my son up. It's our annual one weekend a year. We always go to Nebraska game. So that's where I am right now. But I'm Jack York, one of the founders of a company called It's Never Too Late, or IN2L, and for 22 years now we have been running amok and connecting older adults to the things that matter to them through technology, whether it's music or spirituality or their family or whatever it may be. So the storytelling piece has been a big part of what we do, and I love to see some of these kind of cool companies popping up that are addressing it head on.
So, Bruce, I actually would like to. I know we've done another video on this, but I'd actually like to sort of just, if you can give us sort of the rapid. You have such a remarkable personal story, Jack. You're going to love this story. It's not exactly a driving Miss Norma story, but it's one of those just really remarkable story. And so, at the very least, Jack needs to hear it, and I think really the whole audience ought to hear this story, because it's really about. It's so much of what inspired you to do this video technology with storytelling, right? So let's hear it.
Okay, thanks, Steve. So my background, my childhood, I should say, was a little rough and stable. I'm more or less the product of a foster system. As a child, between the ages of 4 and 7, I grew up going through 3 different foster homes over the course of 4 years. I did that with my brothers and my sister. We started off as an average happy family back in the early 60s. The 4 of us, along with my dad, who was a military serviceman, who met my mother in Japan. My mother is full Japanese. That she got married at 18, married my father. They came to the U.S., stationed in the Tacoma, Seattle area. At that time, my father then was stationed in Korea. So my mom was stuck at home with 4 children, all under the age of 4. And during that time, she had a very difficult time taking care of us. She spoke little or no English, and she relied on whoever she could to manage us. Unfortunately, she had a tough time. So when my dad came back, he saw the situation, the condition things were in, and he basically walked away. So with that happening, the state stepped in, took the 4 of us children, put us in foster homes. At that point, my father and my mother more or less went their separate ways, leaving us kids. Though my grandmother, who lived out in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, attempted to adopt us, the state wouldn't allow it. They wouldn't allow us to leave the state. So back then, they kept us together through the first foster home. We got to the second foster home, and then at that point, they started separating us. And in that world, closed adoptions, we did not know where each of us ended up. So my sister went, she being the cute, cuddly baby. So she went first. Then in the second foster home, my older brother then was adopted out. Then my younger brother and I went to a third foster home, at which point he was adopted out, and then I ended up being the last one. During that course of time, our identity, our connection to family didn't exist. We simply went our separate ways. Fortunately for me, by the time I was 7, I was adopted by my first grade teacher back at the first or the second foster home. And then over the course of several years, the question came up as to my identity, who I was. I knew I was half Japanese, but I never knew my other half. So I like to say that I was Heinz 57. I had no idea, to be honest with you. By the time I got through high school and college, and the conversation, the thought process went into finding who I was, I kind of just let that go. I had a terrific adoptive family who took care of me and everything else. But then suddenly at the age of 26, 20 years after we'd been separated, I ended up getting contact with my younger sister, who made the effort to reach out to us and find us. I happened to be the last one that she located. So through the course of a 20 years of formative years, we did not have a relationship. We did reconnect. We're still friends, but we don't have that family connection. And that's kind of, and it's nobody's fault amongst us siblings. It's just who we are and where we are in our life. But one thing that I was able to get over the course of time is I got photos, I got letters, I received film footage that kind of brought some of my past back to me, which I've been sharing over the course of the last month or two. That really kind of brings me back to giving me an identity. And it kind of goes back to when the popularity of Ancestry, of 23andMe, all of those types of programs out there to find your ancestry and everything else. And this kind of culminates with that for me to find out that I know who I am now. I'm half Japanese, I'm 3/8 Polish, and I'm an 1/8 German. So I'm proud to know who I am in that regard.
So Jack, I mean, so this really fits out in his stories, right? You know, and what, you know, so Bruce was talking about, if he were going to be working with you, would be, you know, taking, if you've got audio, video clips and some still pictures and put them into something that could live as a legacy for your kids and your grandkids and, you know, on down the road. What would that, if you were telling your dad's story, what would that look like?
Yeah, no, I mean, you know, God, just before I answer that, I just try to, I have 4 brothers and sisters, and I just try to imagine at that age being torn apart from them is just got to be so traumatic. And Steve, I won't mention names, but Steve, you and I saw somebody speak this week that was so bitter about his upbringing, and it's cool how that doesn't come across at all when you're telling your story. So anyway, my dad, I tell you, if I think of my dad, I think of World War II, Nebraska Cornhuskers, Dodger Blue, a man who didn't talk a lot, but when he spoke, it really resonated. So but you know, there's so many things that I wish I would have asked him about. You know, as I've spent my last 20 years in working with older adults, and all these conversations I've had with thousands of older adults, things that I didn't ask my dad. So I mean, there's a lot of it that I know superficially, but there's a lot of it too that I wish I would have gotten a little more intimate about. And I think these kinds of products, the stuff that's coming out, it kind of forces you to do a little deeper dive.
Yeah. So what would you have asked him if you could go back? What are the, I don't know, 1, 2, or 3 questions you wish you could have asked him?
You know, the biggest thing to me is I'm a history guy, and I found out all these things my dad did in World War II after he died, and I just would have asked him about what was it like? What was it like to be a Nebraska farmer that's all of a sudden on a boat going to Asia, and his job was, he was a civil engineer, and his job was building aircraft or building landing strips for planes in the middle of Burma, India, and just a million questions about, just from a leadership standpoint, how did he motivate people? How did you get people that probably didn't want to be there in the middle of 100-degree weather in India to work like that? So I think a lot of it would be World War II related.
Uh-huh.
Well, one thing too, Jack, is the fact that you wanted to have that history, but same thing with your kids or his grandkids, and the same thing with you. You have a legacy that you're building in the senior community, but at the same time, as a father, as a parent, in your personal life, and that's something even your grandchildren, I'm sure, would want to have as well. Just like you want to find more about your back history, I think they would appreciate it as well.
Yeah, well, and you know, the dead on part of this was senior living, and over the years we did some you know, kind of rudimentary storytelling on our platform, oftentimes just using PowerPoint, where you would just put in some pictures and words, and it was amazing how many times, or we heard so many stories about that this work would get done after a resident died, and then these things are said about them, and the staff was just, you know, universally saying, man, I wish I knew that about the person before they died. It would have totally changed how I delivered care. And I think that's really the huge relevance to this kind of work inside the walls of senior living.
It's a good point.
So one of the things that And Jack, you know, I've talked a little bit about this. You, Bruce, we haven't spent as much time together, but one of the things that is crazy making for me, and I think this is true for you, Jack, as well, is that there are actually tons and tons of really powerful stories that could be told out of senior living communities, interactions between families and team members, families and residents, the sort of the legacy historical kinds of things with residents that go and don't get told, but even the stories of how a resident comes into a senior living community and has a transformed life, so that those last chapters are just amazing. And Jack is a master storyteller. When you start collecting, I mean, how do you go about collecting, looking for stories, and how do you think about telling stories?
Yeah, I never know how to react to. I mean, I'm fascinated by just, you know, like what you just said. It's just how people got to where they are. And I think, you know, you saw Steve with the 60/20 tour and the stuff that I'm going to be doing next year in the motorhome. I just think you just ask questions. I think people like to share their story, but there is a I don't know, a humility of a lot of folks in their 80s and 90s that they don't think that their story is that interesting. And so I don't know. I just think it's, you just ask basic questions and kind of let it go. Let the person kind of steer where it goes. And everybody's got their stuff. I mean, everybody's got their thing that makes them tick and gives them joy and gives them passion. And if you can, I always try to find that out in about 2 to 3 questions. And if you do that, then you just shut up and listen.
So, Bruce, one of the things you didn't really talk about, but you also have a background as a journalist, right? And really being a journalist is really about storytelling. So do you have thoughts on how people can better, think about storytelling, collecting stories and telling those stories to, whether it's family members or, I think, as you and I have talked offline, I think one of the things that I really actually like about what you're doing with your technology is that I think it could be a very, very powerful way to tell company stories, company legends, and to tell stories about team members and maybe even where team members came from. So you have sort of thoughts on storytelling? I just love to hear, your thinking.
Well, one thing that resonated with me when what Jack was talking about is the ability to ask the right question, to push the right button to get individuals or senior members to talk about their past. And one thing that kind of resonates with me personally, with a family member who is older, she's newly into a senior community, and she's having a difficult time. And one of the things that I keep thinking about, and it's become a button that I want to push more, and that is a purpose. So if you're talking to senior members and you're giving them an opportunity to talk about their past, you're also giving them a purpose. You're giving them a purpose to share their wisdom, their experiences, what they have to offer that many of us have never been through. And if you can do that for them, that gives them a sense of pride and of self-esteem and accomplishment. So that's something that I think is kind of work hand in hand in getting those stories and that wisdom, but at the same time, on the other side, giving them a sense of purpose and accomplishment in sharing their life. Your point on talking about telling the story of senior communities, that's something that can and should be told. I've heard lately about different things like differentiation, empathy, trying to connect and engage families. You can do that on a personal basis as a senior community simply because you are different. You just have to be able to tell that story. What makes you different from the senior community down the street or from at-home care? What is it that differentiates you? And I think so much of it are the people. there's a big button being pushed about the 100% occupancy. How do we stop that? How do we retain employees? They all work together, but at the end of the day, even though we have automation and technology, it's really the real people, the people who are operating and who are the voices and the people who are personally talking to them. That's who you're going to connect to. And if you can tell those stories, the personalities and create that engagement and connection between a caregiver, the staff member, amongst themselves, even with the families and with the residents, you really are going to differentiate yourself.
So Jack, you did this road show where you spent a lot of time talking to both team members and to residents, and you're getting ready to do another road show. I'm thinking Bruce ought to go with you on part of your road show. Not that I'm mucking in your life, but I will. It's just what I do. So anyway, so I'm thinking that you walk into a community and you see a resident sitting there, and in your usual shy way, you go up and you decide to engage. What are you going to ask him?
Well, I'll answer it, but let me say one thing to just what Bruce said too, that telling the stories of the staff is such a big deal. We did this this is probably like 15 years ago, that we captured there was some family members that they didn't know who was taking care of their mom or dad in the middle of the night. And we filmed this guy who was from Nigeria telling his story about how proud he was to work there, how proud he was of his work. And it was really cool for the family to see that. But to him, this is back in the old DVD days, Steve, but he had us make like 20 copies that he could send to Nigeria for his families to see what he was doing, how proud he was. So I think that a lot of times telling the staff story gets kind of left out of the equation. So as far as your question, Steve, other people kind of taught me some of these things, and that is to, first of all, just if someone's in a wheelchair, if someone is dealing with some kind of cognitive issues, it's just to really gently kind of get close to the person, eye level wise. If you have to get on a knee or whatever you may do, and just look them in the eye and just, I don't know, I think people see that I'm sincere when I ask questions like that. And usually it's just something really simple of, tell me about yourself. And they'll say something that will lead to another question. And like I said, I try to take the lead almost from Johnny Carson. I loved how Johnny Carson always made it about the guest, not about him. And I think that's I think the key to capturing stories is just to get whoever the subject is, get them authentically opening up. And to do that, they have to trust who's ever asking the question.
So I don't do it every week, but we have a weekly team meeting by Zoom because we're all remote, and not every week, but every few weeks, I'll do some sort of a team building activity. And so this one I thought was good that we did this morning was going to be very, very simple. So I said, okay, I would like you to very briefly tell me a story about, you pick which one it is that you'd like, your first kiss, your favorite or best meal, your favorite or best vacation, or your favorite pet that you've ever had. And there were 6 of us on the call, and it took 20 minutes, and there were smiles all the way around. And it's just those simple little questions that you ask people that spawn these marvelous things. And I'm thinking, man, I kind of blew this. I should have spread this over 2 or 3 weeks, because we chewed up half the time we allotted for our team meeting, and we had some business stuff we wanted to get done. So and then Bruce, we start thinking about, well, how do you capture that? And now as I'm listening to you telling your story, and Jack, you talking about your story, I was with my father and some of his cousins a few years ago, and somebody did, I think it may have been like an 8mm, maybe early video they taped, that somebody interviewed my grandmother, and they were playing it. I had to leave early, so I couldn't even watch all of it. But she started talking about somebody who murdered somebody in the family by shooting through a car window. And my grandmother's like this. She was like a pastor's wife and the most uptight religious person. I'm thinking, this is my family. In fact, I now got to go find that, and I'm going to probably send it off to Bruce and have him make me a book with that. So,
That's hilarious.
Steve, tell us about your first kiss. That was the first question.
You know what? I'm not telling you about my first kiss. It was too embarrassing, so I'm not. I passed on that. Talked about food and stuff. You want to tell us about your first kiss?
It was. I didn't know it was very embarrassing, and Mary Ruggles in Pasadena. I was about 15, or no, 16, and it has bad memories. I didn't do very well. I went to an all guys Catholic high school, so my female interactions were oftentimes a little embarrassing.
Yeah. How about you, Bruce? You have a first kiss story for us?
I
know this is going all over the place, but this is what happens sometimes.
Mine wasn't too terribly exciting. It was more traditional. It was a junior high. Back then was a sock hop dances. And it was right after that, and that was one of my more serious girlfriends at that time. Of course, that lasted like 2 weeks, and then I'm on to something else, or she was on to someone else. So it was short, but memorable, I guess.
Yeah, the only kid, actually, I think two people. One person, Jack Cumming, who's part of our team, told this amazing story about his first kiss, and it was a delight. I'm actually going to share out in a few days. We actually recorded this, so you'll have the opportunity to see it if you like at some point in time. But everybody else, we did vacation. Nobody did pets, but we did vacations and meals. But what happened, and this is why the storytelling thing is so important, right? Is we walked away from that time together feeling closer to each other, knowing we learned things about each other that we did not know before. And what I really watch in these kinds of experiences, and I've watched you, Jack, I mean, you're just the master, whether you're talking to colleagues or peers, is that people are just completely engaged, whether they're the storyteller or the person who's listening to the story. And it's interesting, you talked about this person who spoke that was so bitter. And I've talked to so many people who were in that event, and the crowd seemed to sense that behaved like they really liked him, but when it came right down to it, as I've talked to people, it just didn't feel like it was genuine, that he really cared, that he was just there to promote his own interest. So
one thing we do at IN2O, which is we started a long time ago and it's been really fun, is that we've been hiring a lot of new people the last year, but anytime somebody new comes on board, we ask them to say fun 5 facts about themselves that, the more off the wall, the better. And it's a great icebreaker for a new person coming into the company, because people have some wild life experiences, but you got to ask them to find it.
I got to make note of that. So I'm going to steal that. So, and of course, I don't feel bad about that because you guys probably stole it from someplace else, but. So I think that the big takeaway here is that storytelling is really where the richness in life comes from, and that there are tools and technique like what Bruce does with PocketBook Memory. I don't think we actually have talked about the company name yet. It becomes a vehicle to really refine both that storytelling and to be able to preserve those stories for future generations. And I would just say that if I had a single magic wand I could wave over senior living, it would be to improve our ability to both capture stories and tell stories. So, Bruce.
Well, I was just going to say that the big thing about telling the stories, it's not always the people, the places you went. It's the experiences that you encountered in meeting these people and going to these places. To Jack's 2060 trip, I think that would be a powerful storytelling opportunity, just because you're promoting it, you're engaging, you're not going to make it boring, and you're going to have experiences that people are going to want to hear about and experience through you. So I mean, personally, reading about it, it excites me because of what you're going to do, and you're doing things that no one else does on a regular basis. And for us to be able to go along on the ride would be pretty cool.
I'm a little worried that if I go, he'll make me drive, but.
Well, that's another experience.
Yeah.
Jackson,
I interrupted.
I think, Steve, I think you brought this up in other times we've talked, there's a compelling business case for this kind of stuff too, because I mean, if part of the culture of your community when somebody's contemplating moving in is to say, hey, we capture your mom or dad's life story and all the stuff you want to do as a kid that you don't do, and it with tools like what Bruce is talking about. I mean, it's a marketing, it's a differentiator, and it's the right thing to do.
Imagine that's part of your sales pitch is that, when your dad comes in, or your mom comes in, one of the first things we're doing is we're gonna capture those stories because we have never, we've talked to so many people where they get snippets of stories, but they never really heard them until after their loved one was gone, and they have no way of capturing that. That's your great marketing tip for the day. And so, and with that, we are about out of time. Jack, thank you for joining us. Thank you for telling stories that change the world. Enjoy your football adventure with your son.
All right.
And Bruce, thank you very much. And I love what you're doing to help people capture these stories for residents, for team members. Really, it's really about families. And so, again, thank you very much. Have a great weekend. And we'll actually drop into the comments on these videos the links to Bruce's website. And of course, we'll drop in the links to IN2L too, because that would only be the right thing to do. So I appreciate that very much. Have a great weekend.
All right.
Thank you.